meditation is a huge passion of mine, and being more mindful about how we live our life. So that's what this
Perfect.
podcast is all about.
Absolutely perfect.
So
Okay.
when you get up I'll do your intro separate, Firdaus. So when you get up in the morning, every morning, what is it that like just sparks your energy for the day? Like what makes your heart just sing out loud for the day ahead of you?
Well, the fact that I'm alive, the fact that I can accomplish something during the day, the fact that I'm creative, the fact that I'm curious about the world, the fact that I, look at life in a very optimistic manner, despite all the problems we have in the world. And I have dealt with many of the problems we have in the world. I'm a very optimistic person. I think that the world generally is going in the right direction. And so I love getting up in the morning. I love being motivated. I love getting to work. I love seeing what difference I can make in the world today.
I love it. I love it. And you've been, the first thing I saw when I was like looking up and researching you was this hailed as the modern equivalent of Dr. Seuss. Okay. Can you just elaborate a little bit on what that's all about?
Well, that was because I did a program called Buzz and Bite, which are two funny Anopheles mosquitoes out to infect the world with malaria. So it's a malaria prevention campaign. And there's a malaria museum in Ireland. And the director of the malaria museum in Ireland called me the modern equivalent of Dr. Seuss. And the idea is that, because I make funny characters, I don't know, you can probably see one in the background even. I make very funny looking characters because I don't believe in I create behavior change communications, but I don't believe in bashing people on the head. A lot of behavior change communications tells you, thou shalt do this, or thou shalt not do this. And I don't do that. What I do is I use humor and I use creativity to bring the person to the serious point that I want to make at the end of the communications that I'm creating. So I don't tell people, don't do this or do this. Now, let me give you an example.
Yeah.
If you think of most of the domestic violence campaigns that you've probably seen, right? You've probably seen an image of a battered woman. And basically it's saying, don't do this. Well, I don't think that does anything. I think it further stigmatizes the woman. It actually publicizes domestic violence. It doesn't address the person whose behavior you're trying to change, and that is the person beating up the woman in that example. And so I created a humorous campaign called No Excuses on Domestic Violence, and all with 3 or 4 funny animated characters, even made fun of rape, and brought the person, the viewer, to the serious point I was making at the end, and only at the end of the campaign. So I use, when I address people, when I try and make a change in a person's thinking, I don't actually bash somebody on the head and say, don't do this, or on the other hand, do this. I just don't think that works. I think that every person has to internally accept the message and come to their own conclusion to change their behavior. And that's how you get behavior change, not by imposing it, not by having it imposed externally on the person.
So you, in order for someone to get their own internal message themselves, you use a humor approach.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and obviously you're very creative. We'll talk about your book in a second here. How do you get to the point where you say, okay, let's create something humor around rape, like you said, but get the message across at the same time? How does somebody do that?
Well, you apply creativity. You apply a lot of creative thinking because, with creativity, you can overcome any problem. let me give you the best example. I think what's probably one of the most difficult subjects you can think of. Just think of any subject you can think of.
Oh, Firdaus, right now, I mean, Black Lives Matter and
There
COVID.
you go.
Black Lives, yeah.
I just completed a video called "How to Interact with the Police in the United States." You can find it online. It was done for the International Rescue Committee, the IRC. Go online and look at it. And it's not humorous, but it's very factual. It's very straightforward, and it's currently in 7 languages. And it is on how to interact with the police in the United States. And basically, it says things like don't run, don't touch the police officer, be respectful of the police officer, don't argue with the police officer. Very factual, straightforward, calmly put, calm advice on how to interact with the police. I have dealt with these kinds of issues on a global basis. Everything from, and that particular one is a national one for the US, but I've dealt with huge problems, difficult problems, and everything from, as I said, rape to Black Lives Matter to violence reduction among teenagers who are dealing with drug problems, to all kinds of other issues, and of course a lot on health prevention. So I'm working right now on COVID-19 for the 3rd time. I have dealt with Zika prevention, malaria prevention, HIV/AIDS prevention, polio prevention, all kinds of other topics in health. So yeah, I've done a lot of that kind of work.
Well, I mean, I guess I was reading that you have over 110 awards in these particular subjects. So obviously you're doing something that's really very creative and working well. I did see a tweet recently from you that said Africa is officially free of polio. I mean,
yes, as of yesterday, we declared it yesterday. Yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we're down to 2 countries with polio, just 2, Afghanistan and Pakistan. And to put that into perspective, in 1996, which isn't that far away, 75,000 children, just children alone, got paralyzed in Africa by polio. 75,000 paralyzed in 1996, and we eliminated it in 2020.
That's 14 years ago. That's pretty impressive. So I know that I won't go too deep into it. This is just a curious question, but isn't the main reason why like Afghanistan and what was the other country you mentioned? Pakistan is because of the terrorist groups that are in those certain areas where the clusters of polio exist. It's hard to get in there.
Yes, conflict in general, of course, makes it much more difficult to deal with these kinds of problems.
Yeah.
Okay. When there's conflict, it's difficult to vaccinate people. And that's why you have them in those 2 countries. But you know, Nigeria, for example, was the last country to eliminate it in Africa. And Nigeria has Boko Haram and other groups, particularly in the northeast corner of Nigeria. Mm-hmm. And they did manage to do enough vaccinations that they've eliminated polio. So it is indeed possible. It's much more difficult. In fact, up to 50 polio vaccinators have actually been killed in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And so, yeah, because there's a lot of misinformation about it. And it becomes a dangerous thing to vaccinate when there's conflict going on. But we have managed to do it. I had done 2 important videos on polio eradication. I've been working on polio eradication for many, many years. And I think, you know, that's why I'm an optimistic person, because people ask me, hey, Firdaus, you know, you deal with some of the world's toughest issues. How can you be an optimistic person? And the reason I say that is because if you look at all the issues I've dealt with, like human rights is more prevalent now, and that's the first issue I tackled 25 years ago with mass communication. Human rights is more prevalent now than ever before. Yeah. Somebody gets killed or somebody has a human rights abuse somewhere in the world, somebody pulls out their cell phone, excuse me, records it, shoots it around the world, and the whole world can react to that human rights abuse. That's a completely new thing for us in human history. We've never had that ability. Human rights was always done, behind the scenes, under the table. Nobody really knew about it. And now it's all out in the open, and so it's much more difficult to have human rights abuses that go unchecked or unnoticed. So I think that in health prevention, the biggest program I've been known for is on HIV/AIDS prevention. It's called the Three Amigos. It's three funny animated condoms that talk, and it went around the world. It became very famous, and I won the Peabody Award for it. And it exists in 45 languages now, and over 80% of the world's population can see it in their own language.
So two things. These ideas, they're just coming from like your creative mind, and we're gonna get how to unlock that. But is that most of these videos you create are coming from you, right? Or is there a whole team around you that creates this?
There is a team, but I work by myself out of my house. I have for the last 25 years. I don't even have an assistant. I'm just one guy.
Yeah.
I should also point out that I'm best known for animation, even though I have no training in animation. And to this day, I cannot animate. I can't draw. I can't manipulate animation software. I have no first-hand knowledge of animation. So, all of us are creative beings, and that's what I say in my book.
Yeah.
That all of us have an innate ability to tap into our creative thinking. And, people tell me I'm not a creative person. People who draw or compose music or paint or write, those are creative people. That's not true at all. Each one of us is a creative human being. And if you want evidence of that, just think back to your childhood. What did you do in your childhood? You danced, you sang, you drew, you whatever. You used your imagination a lot. You were a creative human being. Mm-hmm. Why are we less creative as adults? I think it's largely because of our education system. And the education system sucks our creative thinking out of us many times. And then we come into this adult world. From being very creative children, we come into this adult world where everything is judged. We whether it's in our personal lives or our professional lives, we want to succeed. We are afraid of failure, and failure is very much a part of creative thinking. We worry about what other people think. We have to conform in some way. We don't want to stand out, and creative thinking often results in a person standing out in some way. So in that way, we get into society that kind of mashes creative people down, that creates this kind of sameness. And that starts at the education system. We have standardized testing, nowadays. It's becoming more and more prevalent. Standardized testing in the school system. I think that's awful, absolutely awful. I think that no two human beings should be tested. They should eliminate standardized testing in schools completely. And because some people are good at some things and some people are good at other things. And that's how we are as human beings. And standardized testing just says, well, we're all going to test you on exactly the same criteria. It's nonsense, absolute nonsense.
Yeah, no matter, so you think the standardized testing sort of stifles creativity especially for those who just don't. That makes total sense. I have to go back to all the stuff you talked about a minute ago. Are companies contracting you to create these things,
yes.
Or are you just doing it on your own?
Combination of both.
Okay.
It depends on, it's not companies, by the way. Companies sponsor, they don't contract. But mostly I work with international organizations, the UN system, the International Federation of the Red Cross, the Catholic Relief Services, the International Rescue Committee, which is an NGO, So I work with many international organizations.
Okay.
And then some of them, like the No Excuses campaign, or even the Three Amigos campaign on HIV/AIDS, which is the most famous thing I'm associated with, was all done on a volunteer basis, actually. Nobody got paid for the Three Amigos. And it is widely credited with stopping the spread of HIV/AIDS in that particular time period where it was prevalent around the world, 2004, 5, 6.
So you've been doing creative animations and different ideas for a long time. What suddenly inspired you? Somebody that I would talk to like yourself was on their third or fourth or fifth book, right? Because they're just, what inspired you to finally get down and say, you know what, I'm going to share this secret that I figured out, or this discovery, and what helps me by writing a book? Like, what finally triggered you?
What finally triggered me is, a lot of people asked me to write a book for years, but most of them asked me to write an autobiography, or something like that, because I've had an unusual life. But I finally thought, okay, I'm going to give back a little bit. I mean, I'm going to turn 65 now this year. I'm going to give back a little bit of my knowledge and my history and my experience over the last 25 years. I've been doing this work for 25 years. It's very unique. When I started 25 years ago, and I told people I was going to create a company, a media company, but a media company with a difference. First of all, I wasn't going to make a profit in the company. And in those days, there wasn't a term for it. Nowadays, in the US, you would call it a B corporation. In Canada, we call it a social enterprise. They didn't exist. I mean, those terms even didn't exist when I started 25 years ago in 1995. So I called it a hybrid company, meaning a company that used for-profit work, did some for-profit work to create non-profit media for social change. And then the second thing is I had no experience in animation. So the first thing I did, I actually stumbled into it. It was UNICEF, and two people at UNICEF, who I give full credit to, who was since retired from UNICEF, decided to take the Convention on the Rights of Children at that time and animate every single right in it. And we created, as I recall, over 100 animated shorts, 30 seconds long, using studios donating their services around the world. And we sent them out in tapes. In those days, nowadays, of course, all digital, but in those days we had to send broadcast quality tapes around the world. 2,200 broadcasters around the world played them. It became the most watched media in the world on human rights, and probably even to this day, ever created. And so well over 1 billion people, we figured, saw them. And so from that came this idea of using animation. And people ask me, why animation? Well, it's simple. Animation gives you a suspension of your disbelief system. You know that what you're seeing is not real. So, for example, on HIV/AIDS, I had 3 funny animated condoms that talk. Now, if I had used real condoms, a lot of people would have objected and said, hey, we don't want to see condoms on television. But if you have animated talking condoms with heads and with arms, and they're funny, you're more accepting of the message because you know that's not real. That's just somebody's drawn that, right? And so you have to understand that Three Amigos, for example, animated condoms, was certainly seen in Western countries, which are liberal, like Canada, US, Holland, and so on. They were seen in very multicultural countries on national television, like South Africa played them very extensively on national television. India played them. But here's the key. They were played on national television in Iran, one of the most conservative countries in the world. And the reason why they worked in Iran and other countries like that is precisely because they were animated, they were funny, and people knew that that's just a drawing. That's not a real thing.
Yeah, you know what, Firdaus, it makes me think of, you watch any Netflix shows?
Yeah.
So there's this animation called Big Mouth. on Netflix. Are you familiar with
Okay.
that by any
No,
chance?
I'm not.
So
Sorry.
it follows like some middle school kids, and it's about their like hormonal changes, and it gets really like dirty jokes. And as you say that, I wouldn't laugh at most of the jokes that they do if it was real people that were in this. But because it's
Yeah.
animated, you remove yourself from that, and it's more
Yeah.
imaginary. And that makes total sense. I never thought of it that way. It's a really
Yeah.
cool explanation.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
What is
you know, you can make global characters in the nose uses, for example. I put this in the book. Creativity overcoming obstacles. You know, how do you make characters that can travel around the world? Well, the answer is I made blue characters with no hair. So it doesn't matter whether you're black haired or blonde or brunette. You are accepting of the fact that they're animated characters there. So if you think about um, you know the differences in humans, the way we look, the way we act, or the way we think, even
Mhm.
around the world, I have to get around all these barriers that exist to human communications and to get into people's minds, and that's very, very difficult to do. My work has been now seen in 198 countries, virtually every country in the world. Even somebody from North Korea has seen it, which is probably the most closed country in the world. So,
I can tell. Let me ask you this. I can
yeah,
tell you're very passionate about getting it, getting your message out to every single country or more countries than just Canada and the USA.
yeah,
What is that? What creates that? What because most most people you deal with or talk to, a lot of it is like their country or the US or English speaking or they're speaking
yeah,
like where you're like, I want to get this out to all the countries. I want
yeah.
people to have these messages. Like, what is it? Is it because of all the things you've seen through your travels and
Yeah.
dealing with?
Well, I have traveled to 146 countries around the
Yeah.
world, but it's more than that. It is trying to bring us back to this old concept of one human family. I
Mm,
know it sounds utopian. I know that a lot of people will say that there's a rise of nationalism in the world and so on. I'm fully aware of that. Uh, I do believe that we have more in commonalities as human beings than we have differences. We have accentuated the differences, especially recently, and differences in religion and differences in culture. And those are some of the reasons why we have some of the problems we have in the world. But having said that, we have, I think, much more in common as human beings. So, for example, if I'm creating a program on malaria prevention, I can appeal to every mother who has the same objective, not to have their child get malaria and die. It's
mm,
as simple as that. That doesn't matter what the mother looks like. That doesn't matter where the mother resides, what language the mother speaks. It's a human instinct to not have your child get malaria and die. Uh, so
right.
I can appeal to those kinds of human instincts around the world.
Yeah. Well, that make Fritos. That makes so much. Firdaus, that makes so much sense because in the spirituality of things and in like the meditation world, it's called Brahman, right? Where like there's God in everybody oneness, right? Everybody is
Yeah,
one together.
yeah,
And I mean, as humans, what makes me think of it when you say that is we all experience the same emotions. Nobody, it doesn't matter what culture we're from. Everybody experiences anxiety, well, if you want to call optimism an
absolutely.
emotion, happiness, sadness, all that stuff.
Yeah,
And you're figuring out a way to create a message that can bring all of that out simply without having to create 8 different messages for 30 different countries.
yeah,
That's
absolutely
really,
right.
really good.
And
Cool.
yeah, so I use the same videos that go around the world. The only thing that's different is language.
Language.
So my work right now exists in over 400 language versions.
Wow.
Uh,
Is there
so
one
uh,
spot we could see? Is there like a website with all your different videos you've
yeah,
created?
you can go to my Vimeo channel. It doesn't have everything on it, but it has quite a lot of my work. So on my Vimeo channel, just put my name in
Vimeo. Okay.
Google on Vimeo, and it'll come up. you will find 3,700 animated shorts there in, I think, nearly 50 different series. So over 80% of the world's population can go to my Vimeo channel and find at least some work in their own language.
What about YouTube? It seems like everybody these days has a YouTube channel.
Well, I do have a bit of a YouTube channel. We're trying to get that going. I don't have a staff or anything. So if any of your listeners have any idea of how to move it to YouTube and how to monetize it on YouTube, that would be great. but at the moment, I haven't gotten going on YouTube. The reason I started with Vimeo, first of all, a lot of media people use Vimeo and not YouTube. And second of all, it was much easier to download. So you don't need to give me your name, your email, nothing. You can go to my Vimeo channel. Everything is Creative Commons. You can use it, do whatever you want with it. And you don't even need to tell me who you are or anything. And we get thousands of downloads with people downloading it and using it. And nowadays, because of mobile phones, we have also put everything up in a mobile format called 3GP, so that you don't just have to get it on high resolution. You can get it on resolutions for your mobile phone as well.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what, all that's awesome. So for me, listening to you, it reminds me of my whole life. I didn't believe that I was that creative. Like I literally, if people ask me, I would say I'm not creative. I'm just not creative. Like I enjoy sports. I enjoy like hanging out with, trying to find girls, this is before I was married. And then like, I enjoy working and trying to make money. I'm just not creative. I used to always say that. And then what changed for me personally was a Tony Robbins event that kind of opened me up to experiencing more emotions, and then meditating every day. So I started meditating, and all of a sudden something in my brain, I don't know what it was, I don't know what happened, but it like it unlocked. Sure. And all of a sudden I had all these things that I never thought about and wanted to do, or creative ideas that started just coming into me every day. And I started implementing a lot of like starting the podcast and what I wanted to talk about and more content and stuff like that. What is it for you in this book that is like unique to all the other creative books that are out there? Of course, most topics have a bunch of books on it. What is it that makes yours unique and that like helps people unlock their creative genius that I always like to say they're born with, and then they eventually lose because of society, and then they got to find again?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is I'm a creative person writing about creativity. Which sounds a bit unusual, but most of the books on creativity are not written by creative people, that are not written by professionals who are involved in the creative industry.
That makes sense. I could see that.
A lot of them are academics. A lot of them are researchers or whatever. They're not involved in creative thinking. Yeah. Secondly, the whole book from start to finish is just exactly on that, how to unlock your brain into becoming a creative thinking person. Because creative thinking is a transformational way of thinking. You open up your mind, you look at the world differently, you do things differently, you think differently. And so that's the whole book from the first page to the last page. So I don't use that many examples from my work. I use a few, but I kept it to very few.
So what are like two of the most important pieces? Now, I don't mean to interrupt you. I really want to I want my audience to be able to take something tangible from the first half of this conversation. What are like one or two things that somebody could implement immediately in their life to help unlock their creativeness, especially for people that say, Justin or Firdaus, I'm not creative. How can I change that?
All right. First thing is just assume that you are the creative person. Think back. First thing is think back to your childhood and do that. Go through your own childhood. Think about how you were creative in your childhood, and then think of yourself. Think, okay, I'm going to be a little more childlike in my thinking from
Mm.
now on. From this moment on, I'm making a decision. So I say in the book that each person creativity or creative thinking is a personal journey of discovery. So you get to decide how creative you want to be and you not be, and you get to decide what changes you have to make in your own thinking to become a more creative thinker. So the first thing is think back to your childhood.
Mm.
Secondly, do some experiments to prove to yourself, if you're not convinced that you're not a creative person, do some experiments that will create creative thinking. And I give an example in my book of just take a piece of paper, any piece of paper, blank piece of paper, take a pencil and take a piece of string. That's all, just those three things. Do whatever you want with them. I guarantee you that whatever you do with them is going to be a result of your creative thinking. Third thing, think about all the ways that you've applied creative thinking in your life because you have applied it a lot of times. So if you say you're not a creative thinking, do you have a pet?
Yes, I have a dog,
There you go. What's the name of your dog?
Gemma.
There you go. That's a creative name. That's a result of your creative thinking.
There it is.
There it is.
You make me think planning dinner, like sitting down with your significant other and saying, okay, over the next 4 days, here's what we're going to have for dinner.
Yep.
These are the
Creative
meals.
thinking.
Creative thinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Interesting.
Look around you. First thing I noticed about you is that you've got blue fingernails.
So the reason I have that, I almost was going to try to get these off before our call. It's so funny. I have a 5-year-old daughter and she
Yeah.
wanted to paint. She likes to paint my nails. So
Yeah.
sometimes I leave it on because I don't want to always have to take it off.
There you go. And your daughter is thinking creatively. And that's why she painted your fingernails blue. And you left your fingernails blue because of the result of her creative thinking and your acceptance of her creative thinking because she's a child. Now, just apply that to adults. Next time somebody wants to be creative with you, creative thinker with you, apply that. Don't judge them. Apply that in your personal or your professional life. Let me give you another example of how you can open up your mind to creative thinking, how your listeners can do it. Daydreaming is a big part of creative thinking, and I say that in my book. So if you're bored, even if you're not bored, just go away in your mind for a while. And that's part of meditation as well. Just go away in your mind. When you meditate, you try to empty your mind. When you daydream, you think about something. So just go away in your mind. Just sit there, go away in your mind. Don't empty your mind, but daydream. Think about a problem in particular in your life. And then think about creative ways to solve that problem. I guarantee you that daydreaming is a better way to apply your creative thinking than actual, being cognizant of what's happening in front of you. Because when you're daydreaming, you're not cognizant of what's going on, the stimuli that's right in front of you, and your mind is somewhere else. And that the fact that you're somewhere else allows your mind to open up. So think about what makes you, what you think of normally, and then apply that in a creative way. So let me give you another example of what you can do. Think of a wild idea. What's a wild idea to you?
Oh man, you put me on a wild idea. It just anything out there. Let's see. I don't know. I mean, if I'm daydreaming personally, I am usually like thinking about like myself. My daydreaming, when I think of it, is putting myself in the position of where the person I want to be or where I see myself. Like, for example, I'm working on some meditation courses and I've been putting myself in my daydreaming in like, having them released and millions of people listening to them and impacting millions of lives and like the feelings I would feel for doing that. And that's my version of I guess, daydreaming. So there, is
Yeah,
that an answer for you?
absolutely. So those are absolutely brilliant. So daydreaming, in terms of being able to think creatively and then come up with wild ideas. I use an example in my book of two different socks. Have you ever worn two different socks?
Accidentally, yeah. And sometimes
All right.
purposely, actually.
There you go. That's creative thinking. That's opening up your mind. So tell your audience, hey, the next time you go out, do something like that. Wear two different socks and see how it works.
Mm.
I give you another example of expanding your mind and applying your creative thinking. You've got a camera next to you, I think, right? On the right? What is that? It looks like a camera, right?
Yeah, it's I believe a
Oh,
water
sorry,
bottle and
it's
then
a
a
bottle.
microphone.
Okay, it
I do
looked
have
like a
cameras in
camera.
here, though. Yeah, we have
Okay,
things.
anyway, you've got a camera there. All right. Next time you take a photograph of your spouse or your child, your 5-year-old child. Next time you take your photograph of your child,
Hmm.
you're going to make a stand where you normally would make a stand with whatever background is going on that you would normally take. Okay?
Yeah.
That's the first photograph. Second photograph, apply your creative thinking. Zoom in to just her eyes and just take her eyes, nothing else. Zoom in to just her nose and just take her nose, or just take her nose from an angle, a side angle. And then if you want to be really funny, go find your toilet brush and make her hold it. Go and find your toilet brush and say, here, hold this. And see how she reacts to holding a toilet brush and you taking a photograph. I'm just making something up.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, apply your creative thinking. And you know what will result? You will have much more fun in life.
That's the first thing I'm thinking of. Just you loosen up a little bit more. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's why you have that zebra chicken behind you.
Yeah.
You've grabbed something from your childhood, right? A stuffed animal, and you put some creativeness behind it, and you have it in your house to remind you, and when you see it, of your childhood, right? That seems like a great.
If you go through my house, I mean, you won't believe it. I mean, even my company, my company name is Chocolate Moose Media, but it's Moose the animal. It's not Chocolate Moose the dessert. So
Play on words.
yeah, play on words, and it's a creative name, right? And I came up with this 25 years ago. So yeah, we all apply creative thinking all the time.
Yeah.
So that's why I say nobody is not a creative thinker. I mean, if one of your listeners is sitting on a chair right now, unless you're driving, don't get up. But if you're not driving, my suggestion is get up and look at your chair. Because that chair was created by somebody out of their imagination who designed that chair, who came up with it creatively. Now, next time you walk to your car, think about the car. We all know that there's so many different designs of cars, right? Some sporty cars, some SUVs, some, cars look totally different. And you can think of beautiful cars, like an Aston Martin is a beautiful car, or a Ferrari is a beautiful car. That's the designer applying their creative thinking. What do we all carry around nowadays? Let's say an iPhone.
Right.
Apple is one of the most creative companies I've ever come across. It is now the largest company by market capital in the world, right?
Yeah.
I think it just passed $2 trillion fairly recently in market capital.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just think of it. Started by two people out of a garage because they applied their creative thinking. And now they've created the absolute brilliant company that we call Apple. And Apple would die, absolutely die without creative thinking. By the way, to use that example, which is in my book, the first company that came out with a mobile phone was called what? Motorola. Motorola came out with the first phone. And for the beginning of mobile phones, Motorola had a lock on mobile phones. The first phone I had I was working with the government at that time, was a Motorola. It was a big clunky thing.
I had a
But
Motorola way
yeah,
back when.
yeah, but the point is that if Apple hadn't applied their creative thinking, and Motorola didn't, by the way, and that's why it doesn't exist in the dominate anymore in the phone market,
Hmm.
is precisely because of that. You can think of company after company like Kodak, for example, which didn't move to digital photography. All these huge companies that didn't apply creative thinking, even though they were at one point creative, and then they stopped continuing to apply their creative thinking, and somebody else came over with their creative thinking. And Apple's a great example of it,
Yeah.
and took over the market from them.
So that's
And
super, yeah,
Apple,
creative. I mean, it's super important to be creative. And it's funny you mentioned Kodak. I don't know if you said that for a reason, but that's where Rochester, New York is their home
yeah,
base where I
yeah,
live. Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
and Kodak's in my book. I mean,
oh, okay.
it's a example, of. And by the way, they were told. It wasn't even that they weren't told. They were told transition
Well,
to digital photography,
well,
and they didn't.
what's interesting, Firdaus, on that is that they needed to be, the reason that they became who they were was because of creative thinking,
Yeah,
right? The
exactly.
photography and cameras and how to make them
Yeah,
work and
yeah.
design, right? And it's almost like their management probably lost that and got
Well,
comfortable, right?
exactly. There's so many different examples of this. Polaroid was the first with cameras, right?
Yeah.
And Polaroid, great creative thinking there, and then died off. All these companies have to, you see, once you expand your mind, you become a creative thinker. That's different than just once in a while applying creativity. You have to become a creative thinker. And I'm like you're trying to change people's thinking through meditation.
Hmm.
I'm trying to change their thinking, their absolute way of looking at the world, and the way that they apply their own mind into a transformational way, which is called creative thinking. So that's what my book is about. The whole book, every page, is to bring you to this notion and how to apply creativity to become a creative thinker.
Yeah. And how does
And
it, do you
that's
know how like processes in our brain, is that in the book too? Like the left and right side of the brain? Does it
Yes,
talk about that?
yes,
Can you
yes, it
tell my
is.
audience about
So
that?
there's the logical side of the brain. I mean, scientists disagree on whether one side can dominate or not, but there's the logical side of the brain and there's the creative side of the brain.
Mm.
But I actually believe that there's a lot of cross between the two. And I use in the book the example of mathematicians. So there's nothing really creative about 1 + 1 = 2. I mean, that's a simple mathematical fact. Actually, it takes pages and pages of math to prove that 1 + 1 = 2, but it does actually, you can prove that 1 + 1 = 2 using mathematical formula. Okay, so there's nothing creative about that. That's a factual statement. Having said that, do you think that mathematicians don't apply creativity? Of course they do. They apply creativity in coming to the conclusion of why a formula works or how to explain a formula. And the best examples of these, the modern examples, and the old example is Albert Einstein, and the best modern example is Stephen Hawking, who wrote books to popularize astronomy and so on. But even though they have to be, astronomers have to be extremely creative in the way that they approach their profession. Even though a lot of it is hard science, it's not a creative thing to say 1 + 1 = 2. It's a math. It's hard science. But you have to apply the way you approach problems, the way you find solutions to problems, the way you explain problems, all of which requires creative thinking. And so I don't think that there's a simple way to say, some people are logical thinkers and some people are creative thinkers. No, the logical thinkers have to be creative in the
Yeah.
application of the logic.
Yeah. So there's a lot of connectors between the two sides of the brain that are firing for both for creative people. So everybody, so the moral of creativity is that everybody has it inside of them. It's not like you need to go learn how to be creative. We just
Right.
have to believe it first, like you said in the beginning of this podcast, is
Yeah.
believe that you're creative, right? Put yourself in that
And then
mindset.
unlock your
And
creativity.
then unlock it by realizing how creative you actually are in different aspects, and then do
Yeah.
things like bring out your childhood memories and do the examples you gave us, and that's really interesting, because what it does is it puts like almost like a pattern interrupt in your normal day
Yeah.
of where I think of a pattern interrupt as closing your eyes and taking 3 or 5 deep breaths intentionally to reset yourself, right, as a meditation approach. And yours is do like that picture you normally take, do some creative approaches to it that you normally wouldn't do, to unlock that part of yourself that is inside that is dying to come out. It's really,
Absolutely.
really cool, like really interesting stuff there. I've never
Yeah.
had this conversation like this with somebody. That's so cool.
Yeah, well, okay, leave the glue on your fingernails, and next time you put on your socks, put on 2 different socks, and I don't know if you tie your shoelaces, but when you're putting on your shoes, tie your shoelaces in a new way, completely new way. Just don't do it the same way that you've done it. Try something new, and that way, these are silly little
Yeah.
exercises, but that way is how you get to the big problems, the big issues. You start with these small things, that you make these incremental changes in your life, and you start to think about it. We all creatures of habit, and I put this in the book too. It doesn't mean that you have to throw out all your habits.
Right.
It just means that if you want to change some of your habits, you apply creativity and you come up with new habits. And that's how you expand your mind, and pretty soon you'll find a new way to tie your shoelaces, perhaps, but perhaps that won't be important. But what might be important is that you'll find a new way to solve some of the big problems of your life, and you'll find a new way to enjoy life, because being a creative thinker brings great enjoyment, brings you happiness, makes you a better partner with your spouse,
Mm.
gets you fulfillment at work, in your professional life. It'll change your life, absolutely, by becoming a creative thinker. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter
and
what you do.
you're a walking example. And I mean, going back to my nails, so funny. I didn't think this was going to come up today, but whatever happens. I've had conversations with people I never would have had before if I didn't have these on, because they would make a comment and then we would talk about it for a few minutes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So in unlocking, a conversation I normally never would have had with somebody if I didn't do this.
And they'll make them into a creative thinker.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's so cool. I mean, you know, these are things that we just take for granted throughout our life. Like polio in the beginning we were talking about, like we don't have in America and Canada, we don't have to worry about that. Right?
No.
These are things that we take for granted that other countries have to actually worry about and think about. I know that's going back to the beginning, and you're creating things and living your life to solve these through creativeness, and that's really, really cool. Solves these worldly issues. I love that. We need more
Yeah.
people like that. One of my favorite things about this podcast, honestly, Firdaus, is talking to people and saying, like, we need more people like you in this world. Like, and it inspires me to be better and do better. And I hope people listening get inspired to do more and be, and I know I can do way more than I already do and want to. And every conversation I have inspires me more and more. So you're creating like this ripple effect that you don't even probably realize.
That's great. So you, I'm happy to hear that. So let me tell your audience how they can get involved. 2 things. One is, if you want my book, of course you can get it on Amazon and so on. But if you go to my website, which is creativethinking.global, you will pay the same amount of money and you will get a personal signed copy of my book. And the second thing is I'm doing 2 free webinars. I mean, in the old days, pre-COVID, we would have said seminars, but now webinars can't do seminars anymore.
That's right.
So they're completely free. They're 1 hour on Sunday, November the 8th, and Tuesday, November the 10th, the next 2 coming up. You can sign up through my website, and it's absolutely free, no charge, no obligation, no nothing. And we'll go through some of these exercises to try and open up your mind on creative thinking.
And that's at chalkmoose.com. I just want people to know CHOC, and I'll put it in the show notes. CHOC Moose, MOOSE.com is where you can find that.
And if you go to the book tab on top,
yep,
you can order the book in various formats. We have ebooks, we have audiobooks, we have paperback books. If you order the paperback, you get a signed copy through my website.
And this book just recently came out, guys. So
yeah, absolutely. It's brand new. It's just coming out, in fact. Yeah.
The key to creativity, the key to a remarkable life. I think it's so, again, I just think it's so cool that I never thought about creativity being so important to having a remarkable life. And everything you've talked about throughout this makes total sense.
Yeah. That's good.
With everything.
Actually, by the way, LinkedIn, which is the world's largest platform for skills and CVs and so on for people, employers finding, for the last 4 years, they have done surveys to employers saying, what is the skill, the top 10 skills or whatever that you most are looking for in people? And all last 4 years, the top one is creativity.
Creativity
is the number one skill that employers are looking for. And that has accelerated hugely in the COVID-19 crisis, because we now have to rethink everything. We have to rethink how business works. We have to rethink how we work professionally. We have to rethink our personal lives. A lot of us are now working at home. A lot of our children may or may not be going back to school. Everything has changed. Everything is changing. And that means you have to apply creative thinking. The more you apply creative thinking, the less the changes will be problems and will be opportunities for you.
That's great. I love that. Let me ask you a question here, and I ask every single one of my guests. And this kind of is like throwing, I mean, this is completely changing, throwing a wrench in our system we're talking about here. But if you could go back, and I do this because I ask everybody, so I want to make it consistent. And I do want to know, if you could go back and tell your 18-year-old self anything, any words of advice, anything, what would you say to them? How would you say it? And, you know, of course you would listen. What would you say?
I would tell my 18-year-old self not to be so worried, not to be worried about what other people think. In fact, I never really was terribly worried about what other people think. When I was 18, by the way, or just before I was 18, nearly 18, I left India and came to Pennsylvania in high school. And so I did make a big transition in my personal life. I came by myself, not with my family.
Oh.
And I did make a big transition in my own personal life. So my sense is not to be afraid of the future, not to worry about failure, try out different things, get the most you can out of life, try to take every opportunity that's presented to you, make the most you can, love the most you can, love as mightily as you can. It's absolutely the best emotion to have, and enjoy yourself. I mean, you know, creative thinking ultimately just makes you enjoy life much more, and I think that's really what it's all about. It's happiness, you know, human happiness.
Yeah, thank you for that. And now, Firdaus, Now I want to ask you all about like what life was like in India up till 18 years old. How was what were you thinking about when you made that move here? How did
Yeah.
that first 2 years go in Pennsylvania for you? I want to know. I want another hour of like all this history on you.
Well, I'll be back on your show. I'm happy to come back. Yeah, I've had an unusual life, no doubt about that. And yeah, and
Maybe we'll discuss that, and I'll have you on in 6 months or so to come back. That'd be really
sure,
cool.
sure.
When your book's like a bestseller, that'll be perfect.
All right. Well, happy to. It's a date. Putting it in my calendar.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much, Firdaus, for your time. Is there any last parting words of advice? I know you plugged all your stuff, which is awesome. Is there any last parting words of advice you want to give for everybody, or did we cover everything today?
I think we covered most of it. And
Yeah,
I would just tell people, hey, you are a creative human being. Open up your mind to creative thinking, to be a creative thinker, which is a transformational way of thinking. And you're going to have a lot more fun in life.
beautiful. Thanks so much. I'm gonna press
Thank
stop
you.
now.
Thank you for your time.